In late 2018, the Canadian War Museum received a World War I rifle that defied physics. It was unnervingly heavy, emitting a deep metallic hum from a mechanical heart that X-rays couldn't penetrate. Hidden inside by sniper Elias Thorne was a secret device so unauthorized it would have seen him court-martialed on the spot. Historians are accustomed to the standard weight of a soldier's kit, knowing instinctively how a .33 caliber rifle should balance. This particular piece belonged to a man named Elias Thorne, a member of the Cree nation who had traveled from the deep subarctic forests to the mud-choked trenches of France. To the recruiters of 1914, Elias was a silhouette, a quiet hunter whose primary value was his ability to remain motionless for hours. They saw him as a tool, but the museum staff quickly realized the man and the machine were far more complex than official records suggested. As they placed the rifle on a velvet examination table, the overhead lights caught intricate hairline fractures filled with what appeared to be oxidized silver. The discovery sent a ripple through the conservation lab. Typically, a soldier was strictly forbidden from altering government property, yet Elias Thorne had spent his nights in the dark of the earth, meticulously re-engineering the heart of his weapon. The historians used a jeweler's loupe to inspect the brass butt plate, finding that the screws had been hand-filed into hexagonal shapes, suggesting a level of mechanical genius entirely absent from his military file. Long before the war, Elias had spent his youth in the isolated trap lines of the north, where he was known to dismantle and rebuild every tool he touched. His people spoke of a spirit of the iron, a gift that allowed him to understand the internal language of machines. By 18, he had built a functioning clock from birchwood and scavenged wire, a feat that local traders called a miracle. When he enlisted, he did not leave his brilliance behind. He brought it into a world of industrial destruction, hollowing out his rifle not to destroy more effectively, but to survive more humanely. Elias's early life was a masterclass in adaptation. In the dead of the Manitoba winter, when a broken metal spring meant the difference between a successful hunt and a loss of life by starvation, Elias learned that every object has a soul. He once spent 3 weeks dismantling a broken pocket watch brought by a Hudson's Bay Company trader, not just to fix it, but to understand why the metal reacted to the cold. He discovered that by rubbing certain oils into the gears, he could alter their frequency. This was the foundation of the Clockmaker. By the time he reached the age of military service, his mind was a repository of forgotten physics. He viewed the Lee Enfield not as a weapon provided by the king, but as a raw material waiting to be perfected. He realized early on that the standard rifling of the barrel was affected by the humidity of the French lowlands, a fact the British generals ignored. To Elias, this was a puzzle to be solved with silver and horsehair. The air grew heavy with the realization that they were looking at a mystery of science and spirit. The rifle seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for someone to release the secrets locked within its forest oak frame. They were standing on the precipice of a story that would challenge everything understood about the Indigenous experience on the Western Front. Before the first tool was applied, the team knew the weight was not caused by mud or age, but by something deliberately hidden. As the curator reached for a specialized screwdriver, he felt a strange warmth radiating from the ancient timber. They were about to peel back the layers of a life carefully redacted from history, starting with the man who carried this enigma into the fire. Long before he was a number in a regimental ledger, Elias Thorne belonged to the subarctic forests of northern Manitoba. To the officers who processed his enlistment, he was simply another recruit whose quiet disposition was mistaken for lack of sophistication. They saw a hunter, but failed to see the mechanical mind humming beneath his exterior. Elias had grown up, where survival depended on an intimate understanding of tension and trajectory. By 12, he was improving tools, carving bone and wood into instruments of mathematical precision. He had once fashioned a fishing reel from an old biscuit tin and the springs of a discarded clock, creating a drag system so precise it could land a 30-pound lake trout on a thread as thin as hair. When the Great War arrived, he did not join for a desire for ending lives, but from a deep-rooted sense of protection for his land. The journey to the deafening roar of Vimy Ridge was a shock that would have shattered a lesser spirit. In 1917, the Canadian Corps prepared for an assault up a fortified limestone ridge that had already taken the breath of thousands. Amidst the mud, Elias moved like a shadow, his presence barely noted until the first whistles blew. While others struggled with grit, Elias treated his Lee Enfield with reverence. He understood that in the chaos of the trenches, the greatest enemy was the breakdown of internal order. He spent his few cents of military pay not on tobacco, but on scrap silver coins purchased from local French villagers. The other men thought he was collecting souvenirs, but in the silence of the night, he was melting that silver down over a small candle, refining the metal into the conductive threads that would eventually fill the hollowed stock of his rifle. This was his private laboratory, a 6-foot-deep hole in the French mud where a Cree genius was quietly outthinking the greatest engineering minds of the British Empire. His reputation grew in whispers because of his impossible consistency. It was said Elias could sense wind shifts before the grass, bent, his rifle finding marks with a speed that defied human reaction. His officers, focused on the arithmetic of the front lines, marked him as an elite marksman, unaware Elias was spending his rest engaged in secret labor. While others slept, he sat in a dugout, working on his rifle stock with watchmaker precision. He was hollowing out channels, threading them with materials brought from the northern woods, turning his weapon into a sensory extension of his own body. In the deep winter of 1917, his comrades watched as he took a handful of snow and placed it against the wooden stock, listening as if the wood were telling him the temperature of the air 500 yards away. He was building a bridge between the subarctic hunter and the modern soldier, a bridge made of silver and sheer force of will. By sunrise at Vimy Ridge, Elias was a ghost in the landscape, harmonizing industrial technology with ancestral wisdom. Soldiers noticed he never adjusted his sights with frantic uncertainty. He simply touched the wood, closed his eyes, and knew exactly where the final moment would occur. They called him the Ghost of the Ridge, a title born of respect and lingering fear. No one realized Elias Thorne was carrying a secret far more profound than marksmanship. He had found a way to use the very vibration of the earth to predict the trajectory of a bullet, a concept that modern ballistics would not grasp for another 50 years. He was a man out of time, using the tools of the past to master the horrors of the present. If you are moved by these stories of hidden brilliance, please consider subscribing. Your support ensures these overlooked chapters are never forgotten. As smoke swirled around the slopes, Elias prepared to make a choice that would leave his fellow soldiers in absolute disbelief. In the sulphurous yellow haze of the front, Elias earned the nickname the Clockmaker. It was born from the precise rhythm of his work, as if he operated seconds ahead of everyone else in the mud. While others wrestled with heavy recoil, Elias moved with a fluidity that seemed mechanical, his hands dancing over the bolt with the grace of a pianist. On one frozen April afternoon, a platoon found themselves pinned in a crater by lead that prevented any movement. From a concealed position, Elias began to work, his movements so rhythmic that the men later swore they heard a steady ticking sound from his direction. He refused the fragile, telescopic sights of the day, claiming they disconnected the eyes from the truth of the wind. Instead, he relied on tactical adjustments made to his rifle's stock. To an observer, it appeared he was petting the weapon, tracing invisible lines along the grain to factor in humidity and cooling temperatures. His success was so absolute that some whispered he had a fallen spirit trapped in the barrel, while others believed the rifle itself whispered coordinates into his ear. He never participated in the rowdy celebrations of the mess hall, preferring the shadows as a calm anchor in a world losing its mind. The emotional weight of his task showed only in the deepening lines around his eyes. He saw the battlefield not as a map of targets, but as a collection of families, even when they stood in opposing uniforms. During the spring offensive, Elias was tasked with neutralizing a machine gun nest, pinning an entire company. The lives of dozens hung on his next 3 heartbeats. With a breath that pulled the stillness of the Manitoba woods into the trench, he made the adjustments. 3 shots rang out, timed to the thud of artillery to mask his position. The machine gun fell silent because of a surgical precision that removed the threat without a wasted movement. His companions looked at him with awe, sensing he operated on a reality they could not perceive. They saw the results, but not the complex internal dialogue he maintained with his equipment or the spiritual toll of deciding whose story would come to an end. In 1919, a declassified medical report from a field hospital mentioned a Private Thorne who exhibited no signs of shell shock, but instead possessed an unnerving calmness that the doctors could not explain. They did not realize that Elias was not traumatized because he had never lost his connection to the natural world. He had turned his rifle into a protective charm, a physical anchor that kept his mind from fracturing in the face of the grave. As the company moved forward, they had no idea the secret was not his aim, but what was happening inside the rifle itself. The moment of truth arrived in the lab. When the lead conservator opened the brass butt plate, he expected a cleaning kit. As the final screw gave way, the stock seemed to exhale, releasing a metallic tang trapped for a century. The back of the rifle was packed with a shimmering lattice of silver wires and braided horsehair. This network was tethered to a name Elias recorded frequently: Carl. The team realized Elias had performed a feat of engineering impossible for a man with no formal training. He had carved narrow channels the length of the stock, weaving silver threads anchored to hand-filed brass tensioners. It was an analog computer designed to translate wind and heat into a tangible feedback loop. By touching the wood, Elias could feel the silver wires hum, telling him how the environment would affect his projectile before he touched the trigger. In 1922, a patent was filed in London for a similar vibration-dampening system in bridges, yet Elias had perfected the concept in a trench 5 years earlier. The sheer intellectual bravery required to think outside the confines of military protocol is what truly shocked the historians. This ingenuity left historians stunned. Elias had grafted the wisdom of the Manitoba woods onto the steel of the industrial age, creating a sensory organ that allowed him to perceive subtle shifts no one else could. It was a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be diminished. In the modern laboratory, the researchers tried to replicate the tension of the horsehair wires using contemporary alloys, but they failed. There was something about the organic combination of the subarctic materials and the specific density of the French oak that created a perfect harmonic resonance. Elias had essentially discovered a way to make the rifle alive. When the researchers hooked the stock up to a modern acoustic sensor, they found that the rifle resonated at exactly 44 hertz, the same frequency as a human heart at rest. It was as if Elias had tuned the weapon to his own pulse. Below the tensioners, they found a small, waxed paper roll preserved by gun oil. Their hands trembled as they extracted the cylinder, knowing they were touching the private thoughts of a man who saw the worst of humanity and responded with brilliance. If this discovery of resilience resonates with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think drove Elias to keep such a secret? With the silver mechanism understood, the team turned to that roll of paper, unaware its contents would transform a story of technology into a heartbreaking secret of mercy. This was a primitive ballistic computer, a marriage of subarctic woodcraft and physics that should not have existed in 1917. Elias had turned the body of the rifle into a hypersensitive barometer. This mechanism did not just calculate wind. It gave Elias the heartbeat of the man he was watching, turning a weapon into a bridge of empathy. When humidity rose, the horsehair would minutely swell, pulling silver threads and shifting internal plates by fractions of a millimeter. To a standard soldier, the rifle felt the same, but to Elias, the wood would speak. He could feel a tightening against his palm, indicating a crosswind, or a slackening, telling him the air was thinning. He bypassed unreliable glass optics for a system of tactile feedback that kept him perfectly in tune with the environment. As the researcher ran a digital scan, the model revealed a symmetry that was haunting. The curves Elias carved followed the Fibonacci sequence, stabilizing the harmonics of the barrel. Elias was not just trying to be a better soldier. He was bringing natural order back to a landscape torn by madness. He used the hair of his horses and the silver of his people to survive an alien world. The historians realized they were not looking at a tool for taking lives, but a masterpiece of preservation. However, the most shocking aspect was that this system had a secret limitation. Deep within lay evidence that Elias used his genius for a purpose that would have seen him court-martialed. The story was about to pivot to a profound testament of mercy. They were on the verge of discovering that the most precise marksman on the Western Front was keeping a very different kind of tally. In 1986, a box of letters was found in a basement in Ottawa, written by a soldier who had served alongside Elias. He described how Thorne would often spend hours staring through his sights without ever firing a shot, claiming the timing was not right. The soldier thought Elias was eccentric. The historians now knew he was waiting for the moment to spare a person. The genius of the silver threads was merely the shell of a deeper mystery. When the conservator extracted the smaller waxed roll from the grip, the room fell still. Every detail of the mechanism served a human story. The paper was covered in a script of Cree syllables and phonetic German. The researchers assumed they were looking at targets, but as they translated, a different picture emerged. Elias had not been using his silver-threaded calculator to increase efficiency in taking lives. He used its precision to map out moments where he chose to hold his fire. Each entry represented an encounter where he had an enemy in his sights, a boy writing a letter or a soldier sharing bread, and consciously decided to let them live. The records were so specific, they included the eye color of the young men and the shaking of their hands as they lit cigarettes. Elias had essentially conducted a census of souls he refused to extinguish. The list was a solitary rebellion against the machinery of war. To the high command, Elias was a hunter, but in the secret of his rifle stock, he was a witness to humanity. He used his mechanical advantage to ensure he never made a mistake in sparing a soul. The silver wires allowed him to see the rise and fall of a German's chest, allowing him to wait for the heartbeat where the person behind the uniform was visible. This was a ledger of mercy, a collection of people he decided to protect. Elias had carried these names against his palm for years, the ink absorbing his body heat. He had even noted the weather during these acts of mercy. Light, rain, wind from the north, soldier. Thinking of home. If this story of the threads that connect us all has touched you, please share this video with someone who needs a reminder that humanity can survive. Your sharing brings these forgotten moments to light. As the final name was decoded, they realized one entry was marked with a symbol of a spruce tree, a clue that would lead them to a small village in the Bavarian Alps. The expected image of the cold-blooded sniper was shattered by the reality of a man who risked everything to protect his enemies. One entry from 1917 described a Bavarian soldier who stepped out to look at a wildflower. Elias noted the boy's hair, his silver locket, and the moment their eyes seemed to meet across no man's land. Elias used his silver tensioners to calculate a path that would avoid the boy, firing into a wooden post to startle him to safety. This revelation shocked the historical community. In 1984, a retired general who'd seen Elias in action was interviewed, and he admitted that while Thorne's ammunition usage was consistent, his confirmed count was statistically anomalous given his talent. The military had suspected he was missing on purpose, but they could never prove it. Now, the proof was sitting in a museum lab. Sparing a person was an assertion of his own humanity. Elias was a gatekeeper who decided which families would receive a letter of loss. The records showed over 40 names. Individuals who owed their existence to a man they never knew was watching. This list of the spared represented farmers and musicians caught in industrial gears. One man, a baker from Hamburg named Wilhelm, had been in Elias's sights 4 times. Each time, Elias noted the way Wilhelm would share his tobacco with the younger recruits, a trait that Elias admired. By documenting them, Elias ensured that even if he did not survive, the evidence of his mercy would remain. He was preserving his own light by keeping others from being extinguished. The silver threads were a tether to his soul, reminding him he was still the man who left Manitoba. But among the 40 names, one appeared frequently: Carl. This young man haunted the margins of Elias's notes, leading to a moonlit encounter that changed everything. In the moonlight of 1918, Elias lay in a depression of chalk, watching a figure emerge from the German lines. Through his sights, Elias saw a young man no older than 19, wandering with dazed exhaustion. Any other marksman would have seen a duty, but Elias saw a fellow soul who had reached his limit. As the soldier drifted closer, Elias realized the boy was walking into a nest of machine guns. In a move of incredible risk, Elias did not preparation for destruction. Instead, he rose from the earth like a shadow. The young German froze, staring at the warrior whose face was obscured by the darkness. For a breathless minute, the 2 men stood in a pocket of silence outside the war. Elias spoke a single word in Cree, a word for brother. And though the boy did not understand the language, the tone was unmistakable. Elias raised a hand in peace and pointed toward the safety of the German embankment. He then offered a piece of dried meat. a taste of the Manitoba woods, placing it on a stone between them. The soldier, trembling with gratitude, took the offering and bowed his head once before retreating. This was the moment that the vibration of the 40 families truly began. Carl went back to his unit, but he never fought with the same spirit again. He became a man obsessed with the idea of the shadow protector. Elias returned to his prone position, his heart hammering against the forest oak of his rifle, and immediately pulled the butt plate open to record the name etched on the boy's belt. Carl. It was the third time he had encountered this soul. The entry described the warmth of the boy's breath and the beauty of mercy triumphing over destruction. Elias was weaving a thread of life that would extend beyond the trenches. He knew that if he terminated this boy, he would also be ending the potential for 1,000 future laughs and songs. The war would end months later, and Elias would vanish back into the wilderness. But the story did not end there. Historians followed the name Carl to a small village, finding the most heartwarming payoff of the entire investigation. When the guns fell silent, Elias boarded a ship back to Canada with quiet dignity. He returned to Manitoba, slipping back into the spruce forests as if the last 4 years were a dream. He declined medals, preferring the rhythmic lap of water against a cedar canoe. He placed his rifle in a chest lined with sweetgrass, a silent guardian of the secrets within. For 50 years, he lived a life of simplicity, a mentor who never spoke of the silver threads. To his grandchildren, he was a man who knew how to listen to the weather. One of his descendants, now an engineer in Toronto, recalls that Elias could fix any engine just by placing his hand on the hood and closing his eyes, the same tactile intuition he had perfected with the silver wires in France. Elias passed away in 1968, a man of gentleness. He had spent his final years carving small wooden birds for the children of his village, each one perfectly balanced so it could fly on the tip of a finger. It was the same principle of tension and gravity he had used to build a computer inside a rifle. It was only after his estate was settled decades later that the rifle found its way to the museum. Elias had hidden his invention not from shame, but from fear it would be used to take the breath of more people with greater efficiency. He chose to let the genius remain a secret to ensure its last act was one of compassion. The story was now about the ripple effect of a single virtuous choice. By hollowing out the wood and filling it with silver, Elias ensured a future for people he would never meet. A breakthrough in the archives of a Bavarian church revealed that the thread Elias started had never been cut. The final name led historians to a village in the Bavarian Alps. They met a woman in her 70s, the granddaughter of Carl. She sat in a room of hand-carved clocks, and as they explained the discovery, her eyes filled with recognition. She pulled out a tarnished silver locket containing a fragment of something ancient, the meat Elias had offered a century ago. Carl had become a master woodworker, telling his family the story of the spirit of the ridge who guided him back to the light. He had once made a carving of a man rising from the earth, a figure he kept by his bedside until the day he passed on. Carl never knew the name, but he kept the offering as a sacred relic, a reminder that in the mouth of destruction, a human being saw him as a brother. This legacy had a tangible impact. Carl's village became a haven for refugees during the second global conflict, a direct result of the mercy he had been shown in the first. Because of that choice, Carl lived to see his children grow. The 40 names in Elias's rifle were 40 separate branches of humanity, flourishing because one man re-engineered his weapon for mercy. One of those descendants is today a world-renowned pediatric surgeon. Another is a poet who writes of the silence of the forests. Both men, separated by an ocean, expressed their souls through wood and metal. In a strange twist of fate, Carl's great-grandson became a luthier, building violins that were prized for their unique internal bracing, a design that, when analyzed, shared the same harmonic mathematics as the channels in Elias's rifle. The ripple effect touched hundreds who carry the legacy in their DNA. The Lee Enfield now sits in the Canadian War Museum, a masterpiece of moral clarity. Its silver wires remain a permanent testament to the vibration of 40 families who exist today because of that rifle. When you stand in front of the glass case, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint hum of the silver threads, a sound that is indistinguishable from a peaceful heartbeat. Elias Thorne's story reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and losses, but a tapestry woven from the threads of our choices. Even when we are asked to become instruments of shadow, we have the power to hollow out a space for the light. As the sun sets over the Manitoba wilderness and the Bavarian peaks, the silence between these two worlds is finally filled with a sense of peace. The clockmaker and the soldier have both found their way home, leaving behind a story that proves the most enduring marks we leave on this world are the ones made with kindness. History is often written in the ink of combat, but as we've seen today, the most profound stories are written in the quiet moments of mercy. Please subscribe and hit the like button to join our community. Your support keeps these lost voices alive. Thank you for watching, and may you find your own way to be a light in the shadows.